fawr iawn i chi gyd am fod yma i Bragdy Cybi heddiw yma ar gyfer noson arbennig o clwb darllan dan Gofanwad. A very warm welcome to you all here tonight to our very special Bluesy Book Club. One of our members has written the book with two of his friends, and therefore they have come here today to do an audience with the authors of the Decade's book. So diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am ddod, thank you all for coming. My boys, Matt, it's very hot, so please feel free to go to the bathroom or cold drinks, very nice. A toilet fel yma, ladies and gents. We've got ladies and gents toilets. We're going to have a break about 8 o'clock so we can share cake and stuff. Which is why you've come, I know. Sgen ti eisiau dweud rhywbeth, Andrew?
Na, dim i ddechrau.
No, okay.
Can we just in the city mewn I bethau?
We'll go straight in then. Iawn. Oh. Dyna chi atmosphere da. Da ni'n gwneud i dim half measures yn yma. All we want now is for the smoke alarm to go on.
Oh, will that make water?
Water?
Will that make the water?
No, we're not that posh. Iawn. Well, thank you very much for coming this evening to Bragdy Cybi and for deciding to do your second in this tour here at Bragdy Cybi. To be fair, if Andrew had chosen anywhere else, I would never speak to him again. Anyway, diolch yn fawr iawn am ddod. So, Andrew, Grant and Mark, first question. Please introduce yourselves and tell us what you personally like about the Bee Gees and how long have you been fans for?
Okay, I'm...
Is this thing functioning? Yes, it is. Okay. Right, as most of you will know, I'm Andrew Môn Hughes. I'm a local boy. I'm from Holyhead. And what was the next part of the first question?
You've introduced yourself, Diane.
Oh, very good. First take.
Tell us what you personally like about the Bee Gees.
For me, when I got into them, it was 1978. It was Too Much Heaven. That was the song that really, really grabbed me. And it was just like the beautiful harmonies. They really, really grabbed me. I went out, I bought the album. There was a little pamphlet within that. And I just started exploring the catalogue, and the songs were just consistently good. The music was just there, the melodies were just absolutely fantastic. There's nothing really that can ever compare to them for me. My musical tastes are very, very diverse, as most of you here know. But the Bee Gees will always be number one in my books.
Even better than Tecwyn Ifan.
Oh.
Yes. I hold Tecwyn Ifan in very, very high regard. I think he's my favourite Welsh singer and composer.
Very hard to do melodies with yourself.
Yeah, he struggles to do his harmonies. Yeah.
And Grant?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi everybody. Grant Walters. I come from Columbus, Ohio in the United States. I'm a Canadian and American citizen, so I'd love to be back in Wales. It's been a few years since I've been here. Last time I visited Andrew and Judy, so thanks for the warm welcome, and glad you're all here tonight. So I don't really like the Bee Gees. I'm just in it for the fame and money. No, I'm kidding. I started listening to the Bee Gees when I was very small, so about 2 or 3 years old. And so probably about the same time Andrew did, about 1978 or 1979. So I'm 47 now, which I guess I'm getting old, but I love their harmonies. I've always loved their melodies. I also appreciate their work ethic. They were very, very hardworking singers and songwriters, and so I've always appreciated how much they invested themselves into their work and how seriously they took it. They really were prodigious, so they were very smart about their work and very naturally talented, and so that's always intrigued me about them. So.
Diolch yn fawr, Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Crohan. I'm from Australia, and unlike Grant, I'm not in it for the fame or the money. I'm just in it for the groupies. Been a dismal failure so far. Andrew promised me the world, but I've been a fan since 1966. Since I first heard Spicks and Specks, it would have been September 1966. Yeah, I've just been a fan since then. I love the melodies. I love Barry's voice initially. I love his tone. I love their harmonies, and I love good melody. I've got, like the others, I've also got diverse likes in music, particularly like R&B, but the Bee Gees always struck a tone, and I've loved them since.
And not Kylie and Jason.
Kylie, yeah, it's only around the corner from me. In Ramsey Street.
I think Carly and Jason are in a slightly different link to the boys that we're talking about tonight, with all due respect.
Next question, how did you three meet, and how did you get together to write the three of them, as you don't seem to be living down the corner to each other?
Okay. Andrew and I got together, so to speak, when they were writing it. We wrote our first book with three others back in 2000, Tales of the Brothers Gibb. It's about that thick. It's a very detailed book. But Andrew and I actually met. He was, this is before the days of the internet. He actually put an ad in an Australian music record collectors magazine saying they were looking for bands who had Australian records. As you probably know, the Bee Gees spent their early years in Australia, 8 years in Australia. The records that they produced there mostly didn't sell very well. They produced about 13 singles and two albums, or 3 albums worth of work. They didn't sell well apart from Spicks and Specks, and as is the way of collectibles, there's not much, because they didn't sell well. There weren't many of them there, and I was there to help source those records. They're very rare. And then we got together when we were writing the book, Tales of the Brothers Gibb, and I helped write and interviewed a lot of the Australian artists who recorded those Barry Gibb songs, and there were 30 or 40 artists who covered those. So I've been involved with Andrew ever since. I've got to read you one. Hold mic closer to you now so they can hear yourself. Thanks for that.
So much for subtlety, that's all right. Well, so I met these guys a little bit later on, and so when I was in university, I was about 17 years old, and it was way before we had social media, and you had to apply for an email account. Not everybody had them at school, so I did, and I started getting online. We had these big Unix terminals we used to work on for email, and I started noticing all these music listservs that they have mailing lists through email. And they had one for Elton John, which I joined. They had one for REM and a bunch of other groups that I really loved. And I noticed the Bee Gees didn't have one. And so I went to my system administrator and I said, how hard is it to start one of these things? And he said, not hard at all. I said, I'll just make one for you. So once I did, I started having hundreds and hundreds of Bee Gees fans starting to join and having conversations. And so that was the real first online sort of venue for us, and that's where I met Mark and Andrew. We corresponded for years and years before we actually met, and that was about 1993 or so. So obviously the internet's come a long way, for better or for worse since then, but I didn't meet Andrew in person until about 5 years ago when I came over to the UK to do some work, and Mark and I are just meeting for the first time this week, so we've never actually seen each other in person until now, and I'm very disappointed. No, it's really been wonderful to spend some time with them, because, as I said, we've been talking for years, and we knew Judy as well and a bunch of our other friends, and so it's really been a wonderful experience. So that's that story.
Yeah, you've heard it all, lots of from Mark and Grant there. But Grant, it's actually responsible for hooking Judy and I up, because we were on the words list, and we first kind of got into contact that way. So thanks, Grant. Actually, I should have said that with slightly more enthusiasm. I think
Don't worry about it.
The PA keeps
on dropping out.
That's why it doesn't sound so good. Sorry. Can you have it sweet?
Why don't we just share a microphone?
We'll use this one. Hang on a minute. Maybe the XLR's not a bit loose on this one. Can you keep that?
Do we need to contact the IT department?
No, it's fine.
No, okay.
The exercise numbers.
Okie dokie. So we're here to talk about the Bee Gees. Can you please tell us who the Bee Gees were and how did they start their musical career?
Okay, the Bee Gees were three brothers, Barry, Robin and Maurice Gibb, as you all probably know. They were born in... Doing it again. Shh! They were all born in the Isle of Man, which is about 60 miles north of us here. So it's not exactly a local connection, but it's a Celtic connection. Barry's the eldest. He was born 1st September 1946, and he was followed by his twin brothers, although they don't look anything alike, Robin and Maurice, on the 22nd of December 1946. They lived in the Isle of Man until 1955, and then they moved to Manchester. I think they lived there for about 3 years. They weren't particularly good boys. They got into a bit of mischief, and the local constabulary, so legend has it, suggested that they might like to move from the area, or possibly a little further afield, somewhere like Australia. Conveniently, there was an assisted passage system in place at the moment, at that time, sorry, where you can emigrate to Australia for £10 for an adult, like, and all the children could go free. By the time that the family decided to do this, there were actually 5 of them, because they had an elder sister, Leslie, and a young brother, Andy. So the two parents, Hugh and Barbara, plus the 5 kids, emigrated to Australia for 20 quid. So they then settled in Brisbane, in a suburb called Redcliffe specifically. They started performing in between races at a speedway track, and they were spotted by a local DJ and promoter for the actual speedway itself. Their names were, the DJ was called Bill Gates, and the speedway promoter was called Bill Good. You may notice that I'm putting a bit of stress on their names and the first letter specifically thereof. The elder brother was called Barry Gibb, while their mother was called Barbara Gibb, and retrospectively looking back, we see that they were the brothers Gibb. So they decided to call themselves the Bee Gees. Now, in many places, you will see this posted as B.G''s, which is totally grammatically incorrect. And many people actually state that this is the original form of the name. But during the research that we were doing for these books, we actually managed to get hold of the very, very first record, the management contract, and it does actually state in this that it is B-E-E space G-E-E-S. So it's been Bee Gees as we know it in its true form from the very, very beginning. From there on, Mark, do you want to take over lots with the record deal? The record deal.
Make sure the exercise.
1, 2, 3. Firstly, I'm going to hold this closer to mine. See what happens. Yeah, that one's. Is that better? Yeah, that's better.
How they got signed to the record deal with Jacobson?
Oh yes. So they were based in Brisbane at that stage on the Gold Coast. All the action there was basically in Sydney. They sneaked their way in to meet a bloke by the name of Cole Joy, who was probably one of the 2 superstars, sort of relative, but in Australian rock and roll then. Australian rock and roll had its own industry, its own favourites, just like any other country has their own favourites. He liked what he saw. They moved to Sydney in late '62. He signed them up. So he signed them up to a record deal, to a Festival Records. They were very fortunate. Festival Records was the biggest record company in Australia, and they got a stingy deal in some ways, and they just got put into a recording studio and see what happened, because they're kids, and you know, kids, it's difficult to get a children's singing stars to find their market. So from that point on, they produced about 12 hit singles, I think, before they had a hit, which was Spicks and Specks. Again, on the festival label initially, Festival Records were just about to drop them in late '65, and they transferred over to another group under Spin Records, who gave them a lot more time in the studio, and it really paid dividends. And Spicks and Specks was one of the results of that release, and it became a #3 hit in Australia. Later it became a #1 hit in New Zealand, but it was the first time they tasted real success, just in time to go back home to mother England.
Da iawn. Correct. Did they come from a musical background? Were their families very Von Trappy?
I wouldn't say Von Trappy, but Father Hugh had worked for a number of years in northern England, and also the Isle of Man as a band leader. And so he was a drummer and also a band leader, so working, doing music with Glenn Miller and other, artists of the time. Their mother Barbara was a singer as well, and I don't believe she actually performed with you, did she? At some point, maybe she might have. But their parents met. Hugh and Barbara met at a big band show, and so at a dance. And so they definitely had some musical genes. We're not sure about the rest of the family. Hazel, do you know if anybody else was musical? No. No. So no, that's it. So the two parents sort of musical. So, but they got everything. Their father certainly taught them a lot about showmanship, and so when they got on stage, learning how to smile, how to entertain an audience. When they first started performing in the early '60s, they sort of had a cabaret act, and so they were sort of performing for adults. So they were doing standards of the time. They had a little comedy routine, a little bit of vaudeville, some things like that. And so that was part of the reason why they had such a hard time gaining success in Australia. They really wanted to be like the Beatles and other folks who were making music out of Britain and Australia, who were making rock and roll records. And so when they went to the studio to make their first songs, there's a bit of a disconnect between their audiences in Australia, who were watching them do this sort of funny cabaret act, which they were very good. But hearing that and then hearing them getting played on the radio and on the records as a fledgling rock group was probably a little bit confusing. So we always say they had a bit of an identity crisis as they got started. But it wasn't really until they got to England where they finally began to sort of make the music that I think they really wanted to. And so they got to England, of course, in the early parts of 1967, when after they had been discovered by Robert Stigwood, who had been sent their tapes by their father, and he called them in for an audition, and later that evening signed them immediately into a 5-year contract. So for those who don't know Robert Stigwood, their manager, who managed them for the better part of 20 years, was a partner of Brian Epstein, who managed the Beatles at NEMS in London. And so Robert Stigwood in many ways had his own Beatles and treated them as such. And so they built a really fruitful relationship together and started, as they started making records in England. So that was certainly a very exciting time for them. And it's when they started making, of course, their first internationally successful recordings like Bee Gees' first and New York Mining Disaster in 1941.
Just to bring a little point to your attention, Grant asked somebody in the audience for a little bit of assistance with that question. That's Hazel. She's one of the Bee Gees' cousins.
Yay!
So, come on, Hazel, we love it. So we've known Hazel for a very, very long time. So she's a great friend, great supporter to you. And we are going to Manchester on Sunday. We're going to go do some of the LBG's houses, the first theatre that they ever performed at. They're on school in Oswald Road, and we're also going to go to the fantastic Victoria Baths. You may recall the restoration programme that was on telly around 2000 with Bethan Jones. That the Victoria Bats actually won that, and they've received a lot of lottery grant funding to actually restore the building. If ever you're in Manchester, around the Stratford area, the Chorlton area, it's well worth going to have a look at. It's an absolutely amazing building. Barry actually did the front cover of his Now Voyager album there in 1984, and he also made a long-form video there. It's an absolutely amazing place. So just one of those little tips for you. If ever you're in Manchester, it's one of those places to go and see. Fantastic place. Sorry, I digress.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. My next question was going to be, who is Hazel? So you've already answered that. Hello, Hazel.
Can I just say something?
Of course, Vic.
Don't know if you need a microphone. Yeah, unfortunately, the place that they first sang live, the Old Picture House performance, before COVID, was for sale without us knowing. And unfortunately, somebody worked in the estate agent and told them. And we set up a campaign to try and save the building with the Community Land Trust, which is nationwide. And this is a total version, grant, and we're trying to save it. They weren't going to accept our offer. Then we had so much publicity that they were, and then unfortunately COVID hit. And since it's been backing forward for the last 4 years, and eventually we sold it again on the radio, to a housing association. Now what we want to do, whereas we've got the old Norman, which is a human home, and the building behind, which is not attached, is where they kept all the hearses and everything. We don't care what they do with that bit. We want to keep this bit out of it. We're in negotiations at the moment to do it. If you're on Facebook, we've got Back to the Government funeral home. So we're still negotiating with them. So we're trying to save it.
Thank you very much.
I want to save the building in Stratford, between where the mum and dad got married and met. So we're trying to do this one. So if you join the Facebook page, and we keep hammering away.
Thank you very much. Okay then, what inspired their songs?
Anything and everything. While we were doing the piece with, thank you for it. When we were doing the piece with Henna this afternoon, they asked very much the same question, and trying to keep everything up to a little bit of Welsh connection. Their first international hit, New York mining disaster 1941, was actually inspired by the Abbott Van mining disaster in 1966. Okay, so that was just one little idea that they had. They were sitting in the stairwell in Holyhead Records in the middle of a power cut. It was dark. It looked like they were in a mine shaft, and that's where the inspiration for that one came from. We were where were we yesterday? In Stratford upon Avon yesterday, and we were at Shakespeare's birthplace. And we were walking around there, and we saw things like All's Well That Ends Well. That was one of his later plays, and that was the name of a Robin Gibb song from his unreleased solo album in 1970. And there was also another song that they did in the early Australian year, which was called To Be or Not To Be, which was a raucous rock and roll song. So they pick titles up from here, there, and everywhere. Mark, Grant, can you pick up on a few more inspirational things?
Everything inspired them. They were songwriters. They didn't really need to be inspired by anything. They could write a song about anything. So sometimes they would, Islands in the Streams. It was a Hemingway book, as was. The Limited Households was another Hemingway, but really they were just songwriters. Barry in particular was just a songwriter almost from the 50s period, who would write songs, and some of them, they were more into versions in the 1970s where lyrics meaning something. Barry was not that era. He was more a romantic songwriter, and they didn't need inspiration to write songs. Sometimes they had inspiration, but they didn't need inspiration to write songs.
Diane? Shall we go on to the next?
Go to the next.
What's with a high voice? And how did they discover them? Somebody's got to ask.
Yeah, that high voice.
Was
So
it too
for
tight jeans?
partially there was some pretty tight pants. Many of you wrote tight pants on here, so on your forms. So for those of you who may not know, I used to sing when I was younger, but all men have the ability to sing in falsetto. You may not have the ability to do it well, but the male voice always has the ability to go into the upper register. The Bee Gees had used falsetto for many, many years actually, and so you could even hear back in their 1960s recordings where they would sort of head up to that register. The first one of them to actually use a falsetto vocal was Robin on a 1972 song called It Doesn't Matter Much to Me. But as you know, they supposedly discovered Barry's falsetto voice when they were recording Nights on Broadway, which was from Main Course in 1975. The producer, Reef Marden, who's a very famous American record producer, allegedly found this voice as he was encouraging Barry to scream ad-libs at the end of the song. So it's partially correct. I think he probably helped Barry refine that voice. But it had been in use for other things as well previously. So lots of people use falsetto. I think now that you look back on it, and even the Bee Gees themselves have sometimes said, you know, we may have used a lot of that. You know, at the time, Barry Gibb's voice was singular. There was nobody else who could sing like he did, and he modeled himself off of groups like the Stylistics and the Delphonics, who were from Philadelphia at the time, who did Philly Soul. Frankie Valli was a huge influence on him as well. Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, who he later got to record a song with for Grease. So, you know, that falsetto voice came from a variety of different influences, and part of it was they're reaching back into rhythm and blues and soul music that they really loved. And so, of course, once it started becoming popular and their songs became hits, everybody wanted more of it. So back in the 70s, everybody wanted to sound like Barry Gibb, and they did. Mick Jagger tried to sound like Barry Gibb in 1978 when he recorded Miss You, and later on when he recorded Emotional Rescue. Lots of people tried to use falsetto, not quite the same way that Barry was able to. But talking to their producers, he had a tremendous amount of control when he was able to use his falsetto voice. You can hear that on the recordings. So at the time, he was very encouraged to use it, and he found lots of different ways to use that voice. But also remembering too that when it was really sort of in the forefront, it was only about a 4-year period when it happened. And so after that, you know, it sort of became less of a tool that they utilized and sort of more in the background. But that's sort of how it started.
Brilliant, diolch yn fawr. Right then, a question for Mark. What was their biggest hits, Mark?
What's the biggest hit,
Mark? Record sales wise, look, probably the best known hit, I'll try and avoid that question, but answer. The best known hit is probably Staying Alive. Probably the biggest might be Night Fever, I would think, but possibly Staying Alive has survived probably now for 40 odd years, and I'd say Staying Alive is, but in terms of their most covered song, it's probably To Love Somebody from 1967. How Deep Your Love, one of the more copied songs. Words from 1968, one of the more copied songs. But possibly Staying Alive I would go. And my colleague.
I'd say that's pretty right.
It's pretty close.
Of course, that's when you're talking record sales, that's when we're not talking just in the UK, that's when we're talking globally here. So even though Staying Alive is probably the most identifiable of all their songs, it didn't actually make the top slot in the UK. It only made number 4 over here. But the number 1 from Fever over here was actually Night Fever. So it's all kind of relative. You know, the US is obviously going to have higher sales than the UK, but Germany was an enormous market for them as well. But coming up with things like Spotify now. This puts a totally new perspective on things. And of course, these wonderful yellow balls, so it's totally proven the point to us. The number of plays that songs get on Spotify, it just defies your imagination. I think How Deep Is Your Love has just surpassed something like 7 billion plays, which is absolutely insane. So physical sales of something. All of the songs on Saturday Night Fever, that album went, what did it go? Diamond, didn't it? In terms of sales. That's it. You heard of that's a silver album, gold album, platinum album. Saturday Night Fever actually went diamond sales in the US, which is how much?
10 million.
10 million physical sales in the US alone. And it was an expensive album at the time. Fever wasn't a cheap thing to buy. And you also have to bear in mind that it was also a double album. So the actual physical number of copies that album sold was absolutely phenomenal for the time.
I am just looking at Spotify, and so Spotify is relatively new. So Staying Alive, according since the beginning of Spotify, has got 878 million plays. So quite a bit, followed by How Deep Is Your Love, More Than a Woman. More Than a Woman was not a significant hit, but got a lot of airplay. So it was probably a long-lasting song, just as much as the other ones were. And then Night Fever with about 350 million. So quite a bit, even in the streaming era. So yeah.
I think it would be very interesting if Gwenna could do some research on records on Hogia Wyddfa. Please, so we can compare. Iawn ta, diolch yn fawr iawn, very comprehensive answer. What was the last hit? You're looking at me blankly, shall I ask the audience? What was the last hit? What do you look blank?
I'm seeing if anybody else knows first.
Tragedy?
Okay, what starts?
Yeah. What do you think? What was the last hit they had? We mean? You win again? No.
So their last UK top 20 hit was This Is Where I Came In 2001. So yeah, that was their last one. Their most recent #1 hit, though, was Man in the Middle from that same album that was actually #1 in Turkey.
Oh.
So yeah, in 2005. So not too long ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay then, the biggie. Have you met them? And I'm not counting Hazel. Have you met them?
Once or twice, or 3 times, 4 times. I don't know. I lost count of the amount of times that I met the boys. I did quite a lot of work for them over the years as well. I was involved with television programs, radio programs, writing notes for CDs, DVDs, tour programs, all sorts of stuff. They had a set of commemorative stamps issued in the Isle of Man in 1998. I had a meeting at Barry's house for that, like I was set about as far away as that little glass of beer is away from him at that point for several hours, and getting gradually closer as the day went on. It was great. Like I took a load of my things from my collection from him, and he was just kind of goggle-eyed and said, "What the hell did you get that from?" It was really, really good. So yeah, I've met them many times. Lots of got involved kind of 1989, doing various bits of work for me. So it's been a good experience, all told. And still, if there's a television program or something along those lines, they'll inevitably kind of come to us lot, basically, because they know that we know our stuff. They know that we have an archive of material that they can plunder for images, lots of record covers for newspaper clippings that actually tell the story in a visual way. It's all good.
Yeah, I think out of the 3 of us, I've met the least amount of Fijis. So I just met Barry in 2014 before his concert in Chicago on his anthology tour. So that was very nice. I mean, it was very brief, but I got to say thank you for the music and to tell him how much that meant to me. And we took a very grainy, dark photo together. So that was very nice. So I had a quick moment with him, which was very nice. But I unfortunately never got to meet Robin or Morris, which is a regret of mine. But I got to know some of the family members, including Hazel and some of their children, which has been very nice. And I spent some time with them talking, so that's been a very nice thing to do.
I asked the questions at the 1999 press conference, but that's close to over. But obviously they still remember it, no doubt.
And now we could go back to Australia and America, having met no less than Gerard Pennant. Okay.
No, they didn't kiss him though. Oh, guilty laugh.
Right, yeah, last one question for this session. Do the three of you have favourite albums and or songs? Could you choose one?
Yes, we all differ quite a bit and we fight about it, which is a shame because I'm right. My favourite album was probably the first International, Bee Gees first, maybe with Main Course close second. My favourite song is To Love Somebody. Yes, but we all do.
My favorite album of all time is Spirits Haven't Flown. That's the one that I listened to first. I got for my 3rd birthday, I think. So it's one that I grew up with and I still very much love it. In terms of songs, it depends on the day, but most days I'd say You Win Again is probably my favorite, followed by the title track from Spirits Haven't Flown, and then Too Much Heaven and How Deep Is Your Love are in there as well.
I always say that I have my go-to album. It probably their least successful album in terms of commercial sales. Like it peaked at something stupid like 174 on the US Billboard charts. It's from 1974, just before they came back to their big commercial peak. It's called Mr. Natural, and I absolutely adore it. It's an amazing album. In terms of favourite song, if ever I'm asked this question, again, I have a go-to. I think it's the first perfect pop song that they ever wrote. I know it's quite a way into their career. It was a hit single top 10 over here and reached number 9 in 1972. It's called Run to Me. And to me, it's just that perfect blend of Barry and Robin's voices. The transition between the verse and the chorus is absolutely spectacular. And when Morris joins them on the harmonies, lots of it just totally floors me every time I hear it. That's just me. Lots of it. It's quite simple. Mr. Natural and Run to Me. They're the rules.
Would that be your karaoke song then, Andrew?
No, that's my karaoke song is which one is it? King of the Road by Roger Miller.
Can I say, our Bee Gees journey has been quite different, the three of us. They discovered the Bee Gees at 1978 period. Well, they were able to go back album by album by album and listen to it and find the joys that were awaiting them. Whereas, because I'm a lot older, I experienced each album as it came, basically, so it's quite interesting. It must have been how wonderful I went. I envy them discovering them in '78 and then going back to this great voyage of discovery and all these creative. I never had that, but I enjoyed it as I was coming out.
We've been talking a lot about the song Fanny Be Tender With My Love is one of the ones that we love between the three of us. And Fanny means something less in the US than it does here. So it was a hit there because it wasn't quite as controversial.
Okay, and the last question for the session. These, from the forms that we placed on everybody's table, what do you conclude from them?
We should have sealed an envelope with us with our predictions for what the answers were going to be. You know, what comes to mind? I'm not going to go through these forms now and kind of crib from them, but you know, it's going to be big hair, big teeth, hairy chests, medallions, white suits, high voices. Name as many songs as you can. I sound like Norman Collier. Who's of that certain age that remembers Norman Collier? Hey! Right. Yeah. It was going to be Staying Alive. It was going to be Night Fever. How Deep Is Your Love? Tragedy. Too Much Heaven. All that kind of disco kind of era. That D word, that horrible D word that we don't like to use. And name as many Bee Gees albums as you can. Greatest hits. Yeah, right. Okay. Who are you? Who are you? Alan Partridge. What's your favourite ABBA album? Greatest hits. Yeah, brilliant. There's a few there. There's quite a few which haven't got anything on them. The one that always pops up is Saturday Night Fever, which wasn't a Bee Gees album. It was a movie soundtrack album. Okay. So you've pretty much proven the point to us here. Going back to the D word, Saturday Night Fever, all those songs that we've named, all those things that we associate with them, all relate to that 1977-78 period. And as successful as it was for them, and as amazing as it was for them, it secured them financially, you know, after so many years in the doldrums. It became an albatross around their necks. It became too big, and of course there was an enormous backlash, especially in the States. The radio stations over there used to have BG-free weekends, and I think we'll introduce Grant into this one. Let's to talk about the disco demolition deal, which happened. This is a totally ridiculous story. And it could only happen in the US.
Yeah, well,
because we don't play baseball over here for a start.
Yes. So in 1979, just as the Bee Gees were sort of, you know, at the apex of their success, they were on tour with the Spirits Have Been Flown album, and a bunch of rock DJs, one of which had lost his job because the station in Chicago, because the station had changed formats from hard rock to pop and disco, decided to stage a disco demolition derby at the Chicago White Sox game in July 1979. And so he invited so he invited people in exchange for their tickets, I think being $1 or $2, being able to show up for this doubleheader baseball game, and they could get a cheap ticket if they came and brought their disco records to blow up in the middle of the field.
Sorry, pizza?
Oh, pizza's here, very important. Let's get the pizza, pepperoni, delicious. So they weren't anticipating quite as many people showing up. So folks were drunk and disorderly and showed up with their disco records, and they blew them up midfield. A lot of Bee Gees records got blown up, but also a lot of other soul and R&B artists who really weren't disco. So the disco backlash was a lot about racism as much as it was, and homophobia too, as much as it was about people having a stylistic problem with disco. And so that sort of sent the Bee Gees into a bit of a career tailspin. So it was a really unfortunate sort of thing. The Bee Gees were able to recover, though. You know, we'll talk about that later on about the 80s. But there were a lot of artists who had a platform in the 70s. They were getting played in clubs, and it was a very inclusive movement, what we call the disco movement. And a lot of people had music on the radio and being played in dance clubs and things like that who would have never been able to have an opportunity before. So they were sort of the real victims of the disco backlash. But when the Bee Gees were on tour, they were getting death threats. They were receiving lots of notes of like, things are going south, boys, what are you going to do? And so that sort of ended things for them in the 70s in terms of, you know, sort of their stratospheric success. You know, I would say that, you know, in terms of disco itself is not a bad word. It became a really corporate thing. And so there was disco food at fast food restaurants. You could buy disco clothes. You could buy disco toys. Everybody was taking disco lessons and going out and learning how to dance. So in some ways there was some inclusion about that, but it was also a lot of stuff. So the Bee Gees weren't really responsible for disco. They were just the faces of it because they were the most popular group at the time. And they were just writing songs the way that they were. And you know, if somebody recorded a song like Staying Alive Now, Jamiroquai recorded songs like the Bee Gees did in the 90s, and they thought that was brilliant. People gave them a lot of credit for that. So if you heard a song like Staying Alive Now, you probably wouldn't call it disco. You'd probably call it R&B or retro or something like that. So.
Grant started to explain a little bit about the crush there. Obviously, within the 70s book, we go into greater detail in it, and we should point out at some stage, and this seems appropriate, that both the books and the future books that we're going to be doing about the 80s and the 90s, the forwards for all books are actually written by Spencer Gibb, who is Robin Gibb's eldest son. And Grant has a really, really good relationship with Spencer. He's asked him to write the forwards, and he immediately consented. He said, well, these books have needed to be written for years, and I'm so glad that you guys are doing it. But the forward for the 1970s book explains the backlash as I have never seen it explained before. It is absolutely superb, isn't it, Grant?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the reason why we've written these books. You know, a lot of the answers, I mean, it's not really the Bee Gees, I mean, it's not really everybody's fault that all you know is the disco stuff or the 70s stuff. I would say, too, that not a lot has been done about the Bee Gees catalog in a long time, so there's not a lot of reissues. There hasn't been a huge focus on the other parts of their career. Even some of you may have watched the documentary from Frank Marshall a few years ago called How Can You Mend a Broken Heart that was produced in America, and they focused very much on 1975 to 1979. So part of the reason why we wanted to write these books was to explain a little bit more about how lengthy their career was, how deep it was. And so that was one of our big reasons for making sure these books got written into your hands. So if you haven't read them yet, we hope you will. We would love for you to dig into them, because that's the whole reason why we put them together. So.
I also encourage you, if you don't already, look at their back catalogue, Bee Gees first, horizontal. I don't know where you've got those albums. They're very, very good albums.
Can I just say, this is the first time that I've done well in the Bee Gees quiz. Andrew has done one at the convention before, and his questions like, who produced such an album? And I'm going, I have the fucking idea. So I had to really think, and I managed to complete all of them, and including a few extra ones. So
Very good.
As it says on the top, as it says on the top there, Hazel, this is not a test turned into
yeah, I know.
You don't get a prize.
And I actually wrote some of them in Welsh, like Lost Fever. Got Cadere Fade Away, Red Chair Fade Away. So there's a few typos in that. I'm not sure I've got Blue and the Grey right, but it was class of lyric or something like that. So I can't spell in English, never mind.
Oh, no worries. No. So if we can show our appreciation to the tea, and we'll have a break. We'll have a break for cake and nibbles, so get yourself a drink, go for a wee, wash your hands, and true to form, Dan has arrived just in time for cake. Very embarrassing wearing the same shirt as his son. Okay, so music on please while we share cake. Yeah.